Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode. Well, friends, thanks for joining us today to listen to this episode on the Kingdoms Podcast. I'm really grateful to have joining me from Louisville, Kentucky, Jesse Eubanks. Jesse, thanks for making time, man.
Hey, glad to be here.
Well, Jesse, I've been pumped. I know we were talking about this before I hit up the record button, but pumped for this conversation because if you don't know Jesse, he's a fascinating person. On the one hand, serves in leadership in an initiative called Love Thy Neighborhood, which we're going to talk about in a second, but also is an Enneagram coach, which we're going to explore more in talking about his brand new book, How We Relate, in a minute later on the conversation today. And both serving people and understanding ourselves so we can love people well and love God well are things that fascinate me. So super grateful that you're here, Jesse. But maybe to start us off, for listeners who are like, wow, like, here we go. This sounds fascinating, but they have no idea what Love Thy Neighborhood is, but they think it's a cool name. Can you unpack for us, like, what led to the creation of Love Thy Neighborhood? And right now, today, what's the vision of LTN in the ministry that you're carrying out in Kentucky and beyond?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I love talking about these things, the kingdom of God, both within and without. And so my story is that I grew up in a middle class, sort of typical evangelical 90s subculture, and I became a Christian. I became a Christian at a young age, and then around my senior year of high school, I heard the sermon, and in the course of the sermon, one of the things that was said was there are over 2,000 passages about God's concern for the poor. Wow. And when I began to look through the Bible, this Bible that I've been reading for years, this Bible that was so, important to my life, the reality is it felt like someone had stolen my Bible and filled it with verses that I didn't know were there, wow. Like new content. And that set my life on a whole new trajectory of what does it mean to follow Jesus to the lowly places, the forgotten places. What does it mean to respond to a world in pain? Instead of us taking a posture and go, people are poor because of their own horrible choices. And, I'm where I am because my family makes good choices, instead to take the posture of Jesus, which was that of a servant. And so that changed the trajectory of my life. And fast forwarding, I worked at a homeless shelter for 9 years and launched a gap year program for young adults there. And then in 2014, we were given the opportunity to expand that gap year program to do more work. And so one significant portion of the work that Love Thy Neighborhood does is with young adults. And I say that we are like the Peace Corps, but with Bibles. And so we recruit young adults from all over the world. They relocate to Louisville. They live in low-income neighborhoods. And we partner with a couple of dozen ministries around the city, everything from a ministry that goes into strip clubs, taking meals to the women that dance there, to a ministry that is next door to an abortion clinic, all the way, to arts and podcasting. And so we give an opportunity for young adults to put their hands on the plow and do good work. The other two things that we do, we also have podcasts. So we have the Love the Neighborhood podcast, which we say is, it's like if you baptized NPR, you would have our show.
Hey, that's a great description.
And then we also have the Enneacast, where we explore personality and relationships in the Enneagram, but from a gospel perspective. And then finally, we do workshops as well. And so our ultimate goal is that we really want to help Christians be both relationally and culturally competent.
Yes.
And walk in the life and the lifestyle of Jesus together. And so our basic movement is this. So many of us are so busy, we're doing good things, but internally we're not healthy. We don't really know how to do relationships well. The number one reason that missionaries leave the field is because of other missionaries. And so we love to blame the world. We love to say that the world is so corrupt, but the reality is that we as Christians don't know how to do relationships. So we want to help people learn how to do relationships, but that always has an outworking. It's not just sort of this narcissistic, what's good for me, but we move towards other people to serve other people. And so, and it's a two-way door where we serve others, and that helps us grow, we grow, and that also helps us to serve others.
Yeah. Wow, Jesse, that is a hard, but I find very true statement that as Christians, like we don't know well how to love and relate to one another. That's, in my own journey, something I've had to work very hard on. And I wonder, given the fact that you're bringing young adults into Louisville, Kentucky, into these like ministry contexts, probably a lot of them have this passion to say, I want to serve, I want to go, I want to love on people. And as is the norm in community, you start to discover pretty quickly by doing life together, like what other people's blind spots are. But I know for myself, at least, I'm kind of slow to pick up on like, oh, these are like my blind spots.
Yeah.
So I'm just intrigued to know, because I think for anyone who's in a faith context, they would benefit from your insights into just saying, how do you start being aware of those spaces where God actually wants to bring wholeness in your life, and then start to practice the things that allow you to overcome them, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so the reason that so many of us struggle in life is this issue of self-clarity. You know, it's we see everybody else's issues. You know, you're sitting in the small group and everybody is going, and you're just going like, I know your problem and solution. I know your problem and solution. I know your problem and solution. And then it gets to us and we're lost because self-clarity is hard. It's really difficult, hard work. And the truth is that a lot of us don't want to do it because we are terrified of what we would find. What if our life is an illusion? What if the things that we think we're so, competent and skilled at, what if it turns out we're not? What if it turns out this whole time that, people are seeing all these things and I'm not seeing them, and am I going to be humiliated by that? And so self-clarity, is risky, which is why we avoid it, but it's also the only way forward. We have to be able to look at the truth of who we are, both our strengths. We want to own our strengths, own what's good. These are the gifts God's given me. I want to cultivate those things, be responsible for them. And I also need to be honest about these other things that I've relinquished, these things that I've set to the side that I should have taken a hold of and I didn't, for a variety of reasons. But I think it's important too that even as we talk about these things, that we start with this basic premise. One of the big mistakes that a lot of Christians make is we believe the deepest thing about us is that we're sinners. And while it is absolutely true is that we are sinners, that's not the deepest and truest thing, because before all things, we are loved. And if we start from a posture in a place in which the God of the universe loves us, adores us, dotes over us, sings over us, we start from that posture. I don't need to be scared to look at the truth of things. I don't need to be scared of self-awareness, because actually that's an invitation from God into abundant life.
Yeah.
Lack of self-awareness is a series of chains. God wants to set me free from that.
Yeah, man. Amen to that. I think it's Scott Sauls. He's a pastor in Nashville, but I remember him saying, at the heart of the gospel is a message that is basically good, bad, good. Like God made us good in his image and love. Sin fractures that. And that Jesus went to the cross to invite us back into that wholeness and intimacy of right relationship with him.
Yeah.
That's so significant though. Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say, Jesse?
Well, and the thing is this too, is like, unfortunately, a lot of us as believers, when we begin talking about these things, it's really easy for us to get real busy. We get really busy. We've got plans, we've got agendas, it's called the Kingdoms podcast. Like we get busy building the kingdom, it's like, let's get out there and build and do and go. And I remember years ago, I was trained in the Enneagram by a guy named Dr. Richard Plass. And I remember Rich saying, when he was 19 years old, he felt a call to the ministry. And he said the first thing that people did is they shipped him off to seminary and they pumped him full of doctrine. And he said, what they should have done is set me around a table and taught me how to love other people. Wow. Because he said he was full of doctrine, but had no relational skills. And isn't that so much of what the Bible is getting at when it talks about love God and love other people?
Mm.
It's getting at this idea of we have to be able to do relationships well. That's how will the world know that we are Christians? By the way that we do relationships. And so doctrine is crucial, but doctrine is in support of relationships.
Mm.
And so we have to make sure that our relational capacities are flourishing, and those other things come in and reinforce those flourishings.
Yeah. So well said, man. I know at the outset of how we relate, you wrote, to feel loved, you must be known, and to be known, you must share yourself, and to share yourself, you must know yourself, which ties into what we were just talking about. But I wonder, Jesse, to the degree that you're comfortable, could you share with our listeners how studying the Enneagram in tandem with your journey of faith, walking with Jesus, has nurtured a deeper and healthier understanding of self and of others and of God?
Yeah. So here's an interesting one. I don't know all the traditions that your listeners come from, but I grew up in a tradition in which there was a lot of emphasis put on our guilt before a holy God. And I think that there's a mistake that a lot of people make where they say, well, let's diminish that and just let's elevate just God's love for us, and let's not talk about our guilt. And I think that there's a little bit of an overcorrective error in that. Gotcha. But I also think there's an error that happens in the pulpit where we just emphasize guilt, and God's love for us. That being said, one of the great revelations in my work with the Enneagram was through the triads, and this notion that each of us as people is wrestling with a different underlying emotion. And for some of us, it's the issue of guilt and anger. And so that's your body triad, folks. Some of us, it's this issue of fear and anxiety. That's your head triad. But I'm in the heart triad. And our issue is shame. Our issue is embarrassment. Our issue is that we feel defective about who we are. And we feel that we need to craft personas in order to be accepted. When I was 13 years old, I was not a Christian, and my family was very broken. And there was a lot of dysfunction in my family. And I went to this church camp. And while I was at this church camp, the sermon that was preached was, "You matter to God." That message punctured me in such a way that it dramatically redid the landscape of my entire inner life, my world, who I was. And years later, what I came to realize was that sermon was preaching the message that the heart triad needs, which is the message of delight.
Yeah.
So do heart triad folks need to hear about their guilt, and do they need to know about God's? Yes. Do they need to know about fear and God's presence? Yes. But if you really want to hit me, you come at me, talking about God's delight and his love for me, so, I'm going to read a Brennan Manning book or listen to a Brennan Manning sermon where he's talking about God's love, and you're going to see me move to tears, because that's the balm that my soul needs. So I think that out of that, it's allowed me to have a different dynamic with God that's invited more intimacy, to sit and receive God's delight and then give delight in return.
Yeah.
As opposed to just thinking about it. And for me, as a heart type, what I would consider a little colder transaction. And so that, and I think in the same way, it's allowed me to look at all the other people in my life and go, we don't see the same. We don't process the same. We don't present the same. And it's a mistake to expect other people to experience every moment of their life in the same way that I do. We're all different people. And that also means I get the opportunity to bring different aspects of the gospel to them.
Yes.
The gospel is a multifaceted diamond, but different aspects hit us in different ways. And the more that we can illustrate that in our words and our deeds, I think that we're going to reach people in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, so well said. And I love that you touched on triads, because I'd love to double click on that with you. For the listener who's kind of tuning in and has never heard of the Enneagram, or at least never had the chance to really explore it a little bit more, could you take a minute and just kind of give us a 25,000 foot view of what each triad kind of represents in terms of that core emotion? You touched on that feeling of shame versus delight for yourself as an Enneagram 3.
Yeah.
And walk. Yeah. Did I let the cat out of the bag, Jesse?
No, it's good.
Yeah. and just walk us through what numbers are in each triad and how those core emotions impact us. And then, as you said a moment ago, what the reverse is. If the reverse of shame is delight, what it would be for the other two triads as well. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, so if you are listening to this, I want you to imagine in your mind a circle. And on this circle, there are 9 points, and those 9 points are numbers, 1 through 9. And then I want you to imagine that it's like a pie that has been sliced into 3 pieces evenly. In the first pie are types 2, 3, and 4. The second piece has types 5, 6, and 7, and finally 8, 9, and 1. Types 2, 3, and 4, each of these types, these are each refer to specific Enneagram personality types. And types 2, 3, and 4 are what is known as the heart triad. So these folks are relationally driven. They tend to be, they process the world primarily through their emotions. They see the world as a place of relational connection that they want to enter and engage, but they wrestle with this underlying emotion of shame. And they wrestle with this question of identity. Who am I? And so they're always on a search for identity. Moving over into the head triad, you get types 5, 6, 7. And these folks are thinkers. So these folks are processing the world primarily through their minds. They become at times out of touch with their bodies and their emotions because they're living in their heads so much. Their underlying emotion is the issue of fear. They are scared that they can't find enough resources and security to really feel truly at peace. And they're dealing with the question of where am I? Where am I in relationship to the resources that I need? And so these folks are on the hunt for security. And then finally, you have the 8, 9, and 1 folks, and these are the body triad, and they process the world primarily through their body, their gut instincts, their street instincts. It's like the sixth sense. They tend to stand their ground rather than adapt because they are present and in the moment so much. And they're primarily dealing with the issue of guilt. Now, the trick is that a lot of body types, the 9s and the 1s feel the guilt, the 8 feel no guilt. Instead, they tend to convert that guilt into anger. A lot of their emotions have to do with anger, and they're dealing with this issue of guilt and the question of how am I doing? Am I doing right things, wrong things? Am I being just or unjust? Is somebody doing unjust things to me? Am I doing unjust things to others? Mm-hmm. And their primary search in life is for freedom. They are looking for autonomy and freedom.
Wow. Yeah. So really significant, because I know for me, at least, Jesse, and exploring that, I realized, I'm a 7, so I'm in that head triad, and recognizing the ways in which fear has shaped me, or I've developed coping strategies for navigating fear. And it's so helpful to be aware of those, not just for myself, but for listeners, because there's so many ways in which we will, evolve what you describe as the false self in your book to try and cope with that. And so I know it would be a ton to explore every single number on a really detailed level, but I wanted to look at you have a really constructive way in how we relate, of looking at each type and unpacking some of the different themes. And so rather than saying, let's go through like all 9, which would be a lot, I just wonder, as I'm reading through that book, I'm seeing that you're exploring, the true self, what a healthy version of a number looks like, false self. You're talking about personality formation in childhood and adolescence. But then as well, some of the things we do to nurture the false self, which isn't healthy, but the reality of encountering Jesus, redeeming your true self, and walking in discipleship. And now I know, listeners, that's a lot. So just buy the book for yourselves. But I bring that up because I wonder, would you be able to just choose 2 or 3 Enneagram numbers and walk us through that kind of process so people can see at a really detailed and concrete level how constructive this is and how healthy this is?
Yeah. So I'm trying to decide. It's like, what numbers do I pick? I feel like I'm picking like among my kids or something.
Oh no.
which ones do I choose? What if we did this? Let me offer a counter proposal. This is kind of the one that came to mind. What if we talk a little bit about how Jesus empathizes with the pain of each type?
100%.
Let's talk about that, because I think that that's really a critical movement, because we as Christians, one of the things that makes our faith so unique is that we worship the God who empathizes with us.
Yeah.
You know, so many other approaches to faith, you know, God is distant, God is so foreign to who we are, but our God understands the things that we've lived through. So,
yeah.
So let's just do this. Let me start in the heart triad, and let's just kind of chat our way through a little bit.
I love it.
Okay, so type 2s are commonly known as the helper, and the trick with these folks is that they're really caregiving. They love to take care of people, give to people. They're generous, but they can also struggle with issues of codependency, the need to be needed. And the big thing I think that would be helpful for type 2s to be aware of is that Jesus empathizes with their pain. And by that, I mean this. A lot of 2s in their childhood were praised for how sacrificial they were. In other words, they didn't receive love and affection whenever they asserted their needs. What they received was praise every time that they ignored their own needs and gave to other people. And what happened as time went on is that the 2 grew to believe their needs don't matter, other people's needs matter. And the best thing they could do is just take care of each other, take care of other people. That's what gives them value. And Jesus empathizes with that because if we look at the Gospels, we see everyone wanted more from Jesus all the time.
Yeah.
People had no concern for what he needed. They saw him as a vending machine of goods and resources.
Yeah.
And so when the 2 is in a place where they feel like everybody just wants more from me, it's good to remember Jesus understands that pain. And when you pray and you bring that to him, you're bringing it to a Savior that understands you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
So,
this is perfect. Yeah. Keep going. The 3.
Okay. So type 3, these folks are known as the achiever. These folks love to get things done. They are high capacity. They are often excellent communicators, but they also struggle with the issue that they often cannot nurture their internal world because they're so busy communicating, performing, and fulfilling the roles of their life. And they at times can struggle where they become chameleons and they really lose track of who they are as people. Now, Jesus empathizes with them because 3s often are like that because they grew up in families in which what they did, being on stage, getting good grades, killing it on the sports team, landing that great job, whatever it was, that was what was seen and recognized. You look attractive, you're successful. Well, Jesus gets that because Jesus knows what it is to feel all that pressure to succeed. They wanted a certain Messiah. We're told that people wanted to make him king by force. They were looking for a guy to be their king, and instead Jesus failed them. And so Jesus knows the pain of what it means to not fulfill the idyllic, visions of performance. So 3s, when you're feeling that, I just feel like people just want me to be this certain way and they won't love me if I don't. Jesus understands that pain. And then type 4, the originalist. These folks, did you want me to keep going? Is this good?
Oh, you're crushing it.
Okay.
Keep going. Yeah.
Okay. I want to make sure. Okay. Type 4, the originalist. These folks are expressive. They're emotive. They're creative. They love unique things, but they also struggle with being moody. They struggle with melancholy. They struggle with at times becoming pessimistic because they fixate on negative things. However, Jesus empathizes with them because many 4s in their childhood perpetually felt misunderstood. They really didn't see themselves in their mom or their dad. They were often the black sheep in the circles that they ran in. Their interests often led them to feel a little bit outside the circle. And we look at the life of Jesus. I mean, that's Jesus. Like Jesus was everywhere he went. People misunderstood him. Everywhere that he went, people were like, what is the deal with this weirdo? And so he was always being cast out. So 4s, you may get to say to other people, you don't understand me. You don't get to say that to Jesus. Jesus understands what you're going through. And then making our way into the head triad, type 5. So these folks are called the investigator. And they are exactly that. They are deep dive knowledge people. They love to study things and pull data together. They're often scholarly in their disposition, and they're really competent. However, they can also become reclusive. They can withdraw from people, and they can become emotionally cold. They can become relationally cut off because they're so trapped in their minds. And Jesus understands the pain of the five. As kids, the five lived in a world in which they felt either overwhelmed by the people around them. So they might have had a domineering parent, or they felt, or they even felt that there were others that were unresponsive. So they went to people and they said, hey, this is a problem. And they said, oh, we'll take care of it, but they never did. And the five felt all this pressure. They got to figure it out on their own. In the same way, Jesus understands what it is for people to come in and assert their agenda and push down his, as well as for him to say something that is good and true, and the crowd just doesn't respond. They don't care. So Jesus knows what it is to feel both engulfed and to be ignored. So when you're feeling that pain, bring that to Jesus, because he gets it. He understands. Type 6. So these folks are called the loyalist. And so these folks are faithful. I call them covenant people. Like, they embody the covenant of God. They make promises. They fulfill those promises. They will do it at great personal sacrifice. I think that they came out of the womb like as Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Like, they're ready. They're ready for like any situation they run into. So really faithful, very dependable. They also, however, though, can be really wary of people, nervous. They can be uncertain. They can doubt themselves, doubt other people, and they can really struggle with catastrophic thinking. Jesus sympathizes with these people because the reason that a lot of folks are like this is they've lived through very dangerous childhoods. And that could be a whole spectrum. It could be that a few things happened that were hard, all the way up to they come from a war-torn country.
Wow.
But sixes come from really, really difficult backgrounds often.
Yeah.
And that's Jesus. I mean, Jesus' whole life. I mean, the announcement of his birth and what happens, the massacre of the innocents. His family has to flee to another country just to survive. When he finally grows into adulthood, the people that were supposed to be part of his community, the other religious people, they're always after him. They're trying to trick him. His friends betray him. People are trying to assert their agendas. His whole life is marked by danger and unpredictability. So when you're bringing that anxiety to God, Jesus understands that. Not from a distance, but he has lived through it himself. Okay, now we're getting to your people, the sevens.
Dude, my people, I love it. Yeah. Sorry, a little biased here, folks. I'm an Enneagram 7, so I'm excited for this. But yes, back to you, Jesse.
So, so sevens, these are the enthusiasts. And the enthusiasts, these folks are optimistic. And the key quality of the seven is that they carry a childlike wonder with them throughout life. So as opposed to the rest of us that we left our kid behind, in adolescence, like the seven is like, no, every day is bring your inner child to work day. It's like, you're going to come along with me. They're hopeful people. They're hopeful people. They are people that are excited. They're optimistic. But on the other side, they can become indulgent, and they can at times become naive because they're so committed to sort of, it's all going to be great. It's all like sunshine and ponies for everybody. And there can be a reluctance to engage pain. Of all the Enneagram types, they are the most sensitive to pain. Now, how does Jesus empathize with them? The seven had this issue in their childhood of either prolonged childhood. So they didn't want to grow up. I know of sevens that say every birthday was really sad for them, because it was 1 year older for them and they didn't want to get older, sort of Peter Pan-esque, And on the other side, others had a sudden loss of paradise. I had this amazing home life. Things were beautiful and wonderful. And then something happened in which I was thrown out of Eden. It was gone forever.
Wow.
Who understands that more than Jesus? He literally had the perfection of all eternity. Total bliss, total serenity, total beauty, total satisfaction. But he gave it up, and he gave it up for an extremely painful world. But he gave it up for the sake of us. So when the seven comes and goes, God, it just hurts so much. And I just want to feel better. I want joy. I want happiness. Jesus understands that. He knows what it is to suffer in a world where he wants joy. How does that hit?
Oh, it's very true, in that I was actually ready for you when you were mentioning some of the unhealthy qualities when a seven is unhealthy, even to touch on like narcissism. like everyone is here to like serve my needs. So yeah, I would add, yeah, 100% agree with that as a 7. And I love that you said everything feels like sunshine and ponies to 7s, trying to be like, life is awesome. This is an adventure. We're great. I mean, I felt sad getting older at birthdays, but then I would like think myself out of that and be like, oh, but you're having a party and you're celebrating and there's going to be cake and gifts. So it's
Yeah.
actually good.
Yes.
So yeah, the ability to, even when a situation like 9 out of 10 things are bad, to be able to be like, but that one thing is bigger than all the 9 things,
Yes.
is what 7s do, even though that's not always true. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's pretty sound, I would say.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
My friend Sam says, 7s have to do the work. If 7s have the tendency to want to go, oh my gosh, it's Good Friday, horrible,
Mm,
it's death, and they want to
mm,
skip straight to Easter Sunday. And she
yeah,
says the work for them, the transformation is on Holy Saturday. The
yeah,
ability to sit in the in between, knowing that Easter's coming, but we're
yeah,
not there yet.
yeah. And as a 7, I would say that can be like, yeah, excruciating to like
Yeah,
sit in the uncertainty and like unrescuing yourself with being like, I'm going to be present to this pain, or try and figure out how to grieve this.
yeah,
7s don't rock. At least I don't rock at grieving things as a 7. So,
yeah, yeah.
hey, Jesse, take us into the, go
Yeah.
ahead. What were you going to say?
Okay. Yeah. So into the body triad.
100%,
Okay.
man.
So type 8s, these folks, their nickname is the protector. And these folks have the most energy of any type on the Enneagram. The rest of us run on 110, they run on 220. So
Yeah.
they've got a lot of energy, and they need less sleep. They feel that energy more than anybody else. High capacity. They can go, go, go. They tend to be strong, fearless, direct. On the dark side of things, that energy can become so profound it gets away from them, and they lose track of their boundaries. They don't understand where their space ends and another person's begins. They have a hard time listening to other people, and as a result, they oftentimes don't really know where they are in relationships because other people are telling them, and the 8 is not listening. They are not hearing it. So how does Jesus empathize with them? In childhood, the 8 often had to be bigger than they actually were. A lot of 8s come from backgrounds where it was like a rough and tumble family. It might have been a dangerous environment that they were in, so they needed to sort of be bigger and tougher than they were. Or a lot of 8s come from environments where they were sick as kids and they were battling some prolonged illness. And you're going to get shots 5 times a week. You better toughen up. So the 8 became acutely aware of the fact that there was just going to be combat, and survival is a part of life. Jesus gets that.
Yeah.
Jesus understands what it is to live in a world in which things are coming at you and people are attacking you, and they're often being unjust in the way that they're attacking you.
Yeah.
So the 8's desire to not be betrayed, the 8's desire to have justice, Jesus gets that, and he empathizes with that pain. Okay, moving into the 9. So these folks are the peacemakers. These folks are really easy going. They have their ambitions are very simple. They're relaxed. They have a very pleasant disposition. They're really gifted at seeing all the perspectives that other personalities have. But the flip side of that is they struggle with merging. They struggle with, I go along to get along. I take the path of least resistance. They struggle sometimes to wake up to their life and to have their own convictions and clarity about what they want, because the conflict feels so difficult. Fundamentally, they become allergic to conflict. And so how does Jesus empathize with them? In their childhood, a lot of 9s discovered they could not change outcomes. Mom is a big personality. She's going to do what she's going to do. Dad is passive and he's not listening to anybody. There was a sense in which conflict didn't change anything and only made things worse. And so what does that mean for Jesus? Again, consider all the times that he spoke up and no one wanted to listen to him. No one cared what he was saying. All the times in which he spoke up and it only brought more conflict and more people that were attacking him and wanted to hurt him. And this notion that Jesus was longing for shalom, and yet people continuously shut that down at every turn. So 9s, when you're feeling that pain of, I just wish I could have peace, but no one's going to listen to me, and I don't know how to step up and assert myself because it feels too risky. Jesus gets all that. And then finally, type ones, we call them the reformers. So these folks are honest and they're ethical and they're hardworking. And the big thing on these folks is that they are dedicated to practical action. They don't want to sit around and talk about the philosophy of ethics. They want to actually bring goodness into the world. Yeah. And the flip side is this, is they are extremely hard on themselves. I'm fairly convinced if we could hear the inner voice of the one, the inner critic of the one, we'd lock that voice up for abuse. Like these folks are just, that voice just rails on them. And in our Christian traditions, the real sad one is it often commandeers Bible language. So it has the words of God, but it doesn't have your daddy's voice. So it's got the sense in which it's using these Bible verses to beat down on people, but it doesn't have the love and the grace that God the Father has. How does Jesus sympathize with these folks? These folks, a lot of them come from backgrounds, pastors' kids, military families, families where like burping was not allowed at the table. Like there was protocol in these families. And so they learn to internalize all those rules, or they come from backgrounds where there was actually no rules. It was chaos. And so they learn to parent themselves. And in both those scenarios, love felt conditional. People love me when I do the right thing. They don't love me when I don't. Jesus gets that. How many times do we see people praising him? Yes, you're it. You're the Messiah. You're the one. Only to then Jesus says or does something that they don't agree with and they abandon him. So when you feel as though love comes and goes according to my behavior, Jesus understands that pain that you're carrying.
Wow. That was an excellent summary, Jesse. And to realize that for each of those places where our number most keenly feels, whether it's shame or fear or guilt, that Jesus meets us in a powerful way. The gospel meets us in a powerful way that transforms that. And so I wonder, with that in mind, I appreciated so much that, for each section, you highlighted at the end of each chapter some best practices for like discipleship, like how we are formed, but we are then intentionally giving ourselves to say, here's a savior who understands, who can relate to this reality in my life, who models a better way forward. So then what would you say, even if you want to maybe just focus on a best practice, one for each triad, like is a great discipline to say, so start practicing this because this will be formative in all the best ways as you move in a healthier direction.
Yeah, I think, let me go back to something you asked earlier that I didn't quite answer. So let me answer it with more clarity because I think that can lead into this. Earlier I talked about the underlying emotion that each of the triads deal with. So types 2, 3, and 4 are dealing with this issue of shame, and sadness. Types 5, 6, and 7 are dealing with this issue of fear and anxiety. And then finally, types 8, 9, and 1 are dealing with this issue of guilt and anger. So when we think about practices and we think about the spiritual disciplines, we can think about it in terms of that they are in some way a pursuit of the antidote to those underlying emotions. Fear, guilt, shame, we see it in Adam and Eve. So they're scared, so they hide. Adam feels guilty, so he blames his wife. And then they're ashamed, so they cover themselves, and we still carry those issues. And what we see is our need is this. For the issue of shame, God responds with delight. I love you. I adore you. You're so important to me. I love you just as you are, not as you should be. He gives all of that to us. And we know in our own life that when we feel ashamed about who we are and other people are showing delight in us, it heals that shame. And so folks that are in the heart triad, 2, 3, 4, spiritual disciplines that revolve around the ability to slow down and to be silent and to receive the delight of God and then to reciprocate and give delight back to God. Those are going to be practices that are going to be very transformative for them, because otherwise we will try to fix our shame. If we don't let God fix it, we'll try to fix it. Moving over into the head triad, we have this issue of fear and anxiety. And God's response to that is his presence.
Yeah.
If you think about when your kid is terrified at night, they're having a nightmare, they don't want you to sit there and tell them a whole bunch of theological truths. They want you to sit there and be with them. They want your presence.
Yeah.
And the more that the 5, the 6, and the 7 can go, God's abundant presence is with me here now. You can remember God's faithfulness. You can anticipate that he's going to fulfill his promises, but the only place you can experience God is now.
Right.
And the more that the 5, the 6, and the 7 can calm themselves and be attentive to God's presence now, the more that they can then begin to experience healing. They don't have to manage all their fear because they can let God's presence manage that fear for them. Mm-hmm. And then heading into 8, 9, and 1, the body triad, this issue of guilt. And so for these folks, it's all my actions and my inactions, the things I did, the things I had left undone. And what do I do with that? And what do I do with all this anger I feel, the injustice of the world, and even the hypocrisy of I want justice for others, but I want mercy for me. I need to be able to bring that to God. And for those folks, practices that really let them sit in the grace of God, the forgiveness of God, the mercy of God. And out of that space, then going, I need to go do things with my body, step out into the world. And so in the book, for every type, there are spiritual disciplines recommended to be able to actually enact those. Yeah. And a lot of them are, we say upstream and downstream. So the downstream, it's what comes natural to your personality. And upstream is you're going to put on some muscle. You're trying some things that are going to go, they're counter to who you are naturally. That being said, the container that holds almost all spiritual disciplines, the first thing is always silence and solitude.
Wow. Our
ability to be silent and to be still. And then out of that, we then go and practice them. And so it's the ability to still yourself is going to be crucial.
Yeah. Thank you, because that is so helpful. So Jesse, we started with, and you shared about this big picture reality that basically what God's word points us to is saying people will know we're Christians by the way we relate to one another. And so having talked us through those elements of, each number, the different triads, and even this most recent element of, Jesus not only understands us, but these are some real good disciplines that can allow us to enter into that kind of formation. I wonder if you could leave us with a story or two, whether it's from your own life or someone that you've been invested in, and saying, this is the kind of transformation I saw in them as they went from an unhealthy place to a really healthy place, and how that reformed the relationships of those around them, how their life touched the people around them, how they showed up in relationship to the people closest with them.
Yeah, I think a lot about, so I lead this organization, Love Thy Neighborhood. We have all these young adults that come through our ministry and serve with us, and they come for either a summer or a year. But, to sort of summarize, I'll just say, I'll just make up a name, Jason. Let's, let them be a composite character of a story that I hear a lot. People come and they serve. And when they first arrive, they're like, hey, listen, I'm here because I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to go love this neighbor, and I'm going to serve at this nonprofit. I'm going to be a part of this healthy church, and I'm going to do. But as the year goes on, and inevitably the honeymoon period ends, and the face comes down and the truth comes out, there's all this bumpiness that happens in the middle. And in the course of that, you see this person wrestle, and you see them wrestle with their idealism versus reality. And you see them really, honestly screw up relationships bad, like we all do.
Yeah.
But as time goes on, what we find is that this practice of gathering with other people on a regular basis and authentically talking about, here's what's going on in my life, this practice of living in community with other Christians, this practice of studying the scriptures together, but also going out and serving other people. But at its heart, the capacity for intimate community with other Christians begins to dramatically change the way that this person lives, operates, and perceives. And it really shifts their understanding of who God is. Yeah. Because when they experience enough grace and enough mercy in this community, they've screwed up so many times. I did the same thing over again, and you still showed mercy to me, or you love me enough to confront me and tell me something I didn't want to hear. But they receive all of this from others, and they begin to believe that it's true about God themselves. And they get to the end and they say, I didn't realize how lonely I was until I got here.
Mm.
And I didn't realize how much I needed healthy relationships until I got here.
Mm.
And then they say, this is why God has made us for relationships, because nothing shapes us, changes us, and transforms us more than the relationships in our lives. And so we see that cycle. I've been watching that cycle now for almost 20 years working with young adults, that when their relational capacities grow, everything else flourishes as a result.
And what a beautiful vision and compelling vision when we think about what the people of God could be in community to one another and to the world. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that, Jesse. We're almost at the hour mark already of our conversation together. And so I'd love for listeners who have really benefited from this. They're saying, yes, Jesse, like this is awesome. I want to learn more, not only about the book you've written, but Love Thy Neighborhood. I just want to connect with you online. So whether it's learning more about Love Thy Neighborhood, maybe people, young adults in Canada who are like, I want to apply and go for a year, whether it's connecting with you online or especially picking up a copy of your new book, How We Relate, how can people do that?
Yeah, we would love to help you build better relationships. And if you would like to know more about the book, you can go to howwerelatebook.com. It's also available for sale wherever you prefer to get books. But you can get the first 2 chapters for free if you go to that website. If you want to know more about Love Thy Neighborhood and our programs for young adults, our podcasts that we put out, or the workshops that we offer Enneagram workshops. All of those things can be found at lovethyneighborhood.org. And then I do especially want to say that we would especially love for you to check out our podcast. So if you're like, hey, I wish that I could find podcasts that explore real world issues that we as Christians are dealing with, our podcast, we like to say it's where the gospel meets modern culture. So we're doing real world documentary journalism, exploring everything from, racial reconciliation to gender dysphoria, from dating to addiction. What does the gospel mean for all these things? And telling stories of Christians wrestling with it. And so that's called the Love Thy Neighborhood podcast. And you can check that out wherever you get your podcasts.
Absolutely. Well, Jesse, this has really been a privilege. Thank you so much for making this time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.